Hi, my name's Abigail Urick. This is my presentation on the ISO setting on digital and film cameras. ISO, what does it stand for? ISO stands for Industrial Standardization Organization, where it's an organization that standardizes many things, but the acronym is most known for its association with the camera setting, and it affects light and dark sensitivities, and also the noise or graininess levels of an image. The way the ISO is organized is based on a logarithmic scale, meaning it'll double with every increase of the ISO. Normal cameras start at about 100, with the assumption that quote unquote normal photographic uses are in well lit rooms or outside spaces with normal amounts of light. With each increase in sensitivity, it doubles, so 100, 200, 400, 800, 1600, and 3200 are common in most accessible cameras. The lower the ISO, the more light is assumed to be available. Higher ISOs, like 1600 and 3200, and then all the way up to other cameras, like the ME20 FSH, which can shoot in almost pitch black spaces, and that one is at around 4 million ISO. But what is ISO? What does it mean? Where did it start? The origin of film photography came from the idea of finding a way to make permanent the phenomenon of camera obscura. When it was discovered that certain chemical mixtures were light reactive, the invention of the camera was on its way. There were found to be more than one method to develop an image from light, and the different chemical processes had different effects. So Herder and Dreifeld are some scientists, not the first ones, not the last ones, but they tested out the different materials and organized them by their sensitivities to light exposure. They would test out how light exposed and then rank them in order of how long it took. So some chemical processes took hours, some took minutes, and everything in between. But it's hard to categorize it because they also had different impacts of amount of light, not just exposure time. So it wasn't a perfect study. Their findings weren't as consistent as they hoped, but other scientists furthered these efforts until we get to our most modern one, where the ISO is the most accurate and recent way to measure a film strip's reaction to light. If you know anything about cameras, you know that the main three things that photographers use to make an image is the ISO, aperture, and shutter. So how does ISO fit in with aperture and shutter? So the photographic process starts with how cameras interact with light. The aperture changes the size of the hole that allows light in, and shutter is how much time light has to enter the camera lens. The ISO is the actual film strip's chemical and physical properties, labeled by the logarithmic number, that have a set reaction to the various aperture and shutter settings. So with film photography, you will have to purchase film with the ISO that you know is going to be what you're going to be taking a photo of. So if you know there's going to be a lot of light available, you're going to purchase a lower ISO, and if you know that where you're going to be photographing is going to have no light or very little light, you're going to have higher ISO. And with shutter and aperture, you can fine-tune exposure per shot, and those adjust the light that you have, but the ISO is just like the basic. You're telling the camera how much light is available. With the digital photography, the ISO is automatically set at around 100 to 100. You can manually change it to communicate to your device what the present light situation is at hand. So in summary and basic how to use ISO in photography is if you have a film camera and you know you're going to be shooting in the dark, go out and purchase higher ISO film. So around 1600, 3200. If you're going to be in like pitch blackness or just really dark, even higher, however far it goes. Or the other way, if it's shooting in light spaces, you'll purchase lower ISO film. If you have a digital camera and you know you're going to be shooting in the broad daylight, you're basically just going to not have to change anything. Just double check that your settings are already at the 100. But if you're going to be photographing in the dark, you're just letting your camera know what the base lighting already is in the situation that you are filming in. Otherwise, adjusting your camera interactions with the light is more for the job of aperture and shutter. So say there's a lot of light and you want the picture to be darker, you can have less light come into the camera and have a shorter shutter speed of how much time the light has to enter it so that your image looks darker than the image would have been if you just had basic settings. So that is that. And these are my sources in list of alphabetical. Boop, boop. Thanks for seeing my presentation.